I'm presenting to you a sample plan for grade 6 using the Fluency-Oriented Reading Instruction FORI strategy found on pages 168 and 169 of Assessment for Reading Instruction. The reason I'm presenting the plan is because I'm currently on maternity leave, so this is what I would use with my students if I did have a class. Previously in our slideshow, my peers presented one day of the plan, but as we've read, this instruction is a 5-day research-based strategy to approach fluency by repetition of reading, echo reading, choral reading, and targeted instruction on vocabulary. So for grade 6, I would use poetry, and I'm using a combination of 2 poems, The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, and using that as an introduction to a novel study for Home of the Brave by Catherine Applegate, which is a book in verse. Hypothetically, each of these days could be a warm-up, but some of them I realize would actually take maybe the whole class period to complete. So I'll walk you through each of the days right now, and towards the end of the week, you'll see that we have some wide reading. Okay, day 1. Just as it mentions in the book, you want to start by pre-teaching vocabulary that may be troublesome for students, so 2 to 3 words. I've selected exile, refugee, and colossus because they connect to both of the texts. And since I have middle grades, we'll be focusing on syllables and affixes. So I've broken apart each of the words by prefix and root, and students can do a turn and talk based on the vocabulary, words, prefixes, and roots. What do you think each of the words means? So they can discuss with their peer, and then we'll share out ideas and conclude the definitions for the words as well. I would turn students' attention to the word colossus and think about how it looks and how it sounds, and based on the sight and sound of this word, what can you infer about the meaning of the word? So students might come up with other words that are similar, like colossal or colosseum, and be able to conclude that colossus means giant. Okay, back to day 1. We can also activate prior knowledge through discussion. What can we infer about the title of the poem, The New Colossus? So if we know that colossus means giant, the new giant, that means that there must have been an old giant. And is this real life? Is this fiction? Is this nonfiction? So just talking a little bit about that. Then I would read expressively The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus to the students for the first time, so they can hear how I'm stressing certain words and my pace as well. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Now, I would read that aloud and then discuss with students questions about each of the lines. And I would probably do this in whole group instruction or maybe co-teaching with smaller groups. And this is really less about the fluency and more about the comprehension and the meaning. So getting students to understand what the poem is about is going to help them when they're reading the poem aloud, which is the next day. So for example, what is an exile? Targeting that vocabulary again. Why does the poet refer to the Statue of Liberty as the mother of exiles? So students will be able to better understand what the poem is discussing and learn that it's actually on the Statue of Liberty. Okay, and then we would just summarize summarize what we discussed and any themes related to immigration. Day 2 of the Fluency-Oriented Reading Instruction Strategy in the book mentions echo reading the book. However, this is less appropriate for older students. So I've modified the plan. Students will choral read the poem in partnerships or in small groups. So this is their first time reading the poem. Might be a little awkward, but they're going to read it together. They can hear how their peers read the poem. They can do this several times if they have time for it. And while they're reading, I would walk around the room and ask students to focus on the vocabulary words. I would offer clarification and decoding strategies for any other difficult words, like something like tempest-tossed might be difficult if we hadn't discussed that or if they forgot what that means. After reading the poem, in the choral reading, students will then reread the poem silently at their desks, jotting down and underlining what they notice about the poem. So anything new come up today that we didn't discuss the first day, or anything have deeper meaning or clarified meaning now that they've read the poem. And then we would spend some time sharing and talking about what they noticed, and maybe if we had time, discuss the rhyme scheme and how it impacts their reading. So day 3, the students have read the poem once orally and once silently. Now I'm going to reread it expressively again. And as I read it, students are going to pay attention to how I'm reading it, and they're also going to visualize the poem now that they have the comprehension. I would emphasize that when the text is read aloud, that they need to pay attention to how I'm stressing or emphasizing certain words and how that could impact meaning. So for example, when I say mother of exiles, or going back to the poem, when the Statue of Liberty is saying, keep ancient lands your storied prompt, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. If you're reading this, you feel strong, you feel empowered. So when you're reading it, that tone should come across. And going back to the plan, we would discuss how that impacts the meaning, or even you as a listener, how that impacts how you feel when you're listening to the poem. And day 4 is now where we get into wide reading. So I would move from the New Colossus to the novel Home of the Brave by Catherine Applegate by introducing the first chapter, which is a poem called Snow. I have that linked here for you. And students would pair or partner read the poem. So if they're partner reading, they are reading with someone that they maybe have selected, a classmate, a friend. And if they're paired reading, I'm going to match them with somebody who a stronger reader with a middle reader, and a middle reader with a lower reader, just so that they have that varied experience. So students will read this poem. I'll read just a little bit of it so you can get a sense of what it's about. When the flying boat returns to earth at last, I open my eyes and gaze out the round window. What is all the white? I whisper. Where is all the world? The helping man greets me, and there are many lines and questions and pieces of paper. At last, I follow him outside. We call this snow. That's snow, he says. Isn't it beautiful? Do you like the cold? I want to say, no. This cold is like claws on my skin. I look around me. Dead grass pokes through the unkind blanket of white. All right. Now, students may realize that this narrator is at an airport, arriving somewhere where there's snow, and he hasn't seen this yet. So I could walk around with students and confer with them. What do they think the poem is about? What is happening here? And hopefully they would be able to understand by something like the flying boat. That's the airplane. Why would the narrator call it a flying boat? Why wouldn't they just call it an airplane? Probably because they're not from the United States and they don't know the English language. So that we can begin our novel study here. Now, day 5 is an extension activity, as mentioned in assessment for reading instruction. And this is pretty much from the book, but I provided prompts here. So the 3 options are conversation groups. They could share ideas about how the poem The New Colossus may relate to Keck, the narrator from Home of the Brave, his experience entering and the new life in the United States. students could do a writing extension activity. So they might respond in their journal, does Emma Lazarus' poem regarding the Statue of Liberty and America being a land that accepts immigrants still ring true today? And use evidence from Home of the Brave to support your ideas. And lastly, an inquiry project. Students can use the new Colossus as a starting point to research the history of immigration into the United States to the present. And the reason that I've selected these two, this poem moving into the novel study, not only because when they're reading poetry for fluency, it's got a musical element to it, and it's a little more complex in meaning, so that students have to think about how they're reading it and how that impacts comprehension, and how their comprehension also impacts their reading of it, but also because the new Colossus is in the novel Home of the Brave. It's discussed frequently. So there you have my sample plan using the fluency-oriented reading instruction strategy for middle grades. Thank you very much.